Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today to, I think it's episode 12 of Experience.This.Travel show. Really excited to be here today with this amazing group of women, along with co-host Bruce and Christian. We're going to talk about women in travel today. There are a lot of things that we could be discussing. We're going to try to keep it to a few topics so we can really dive in. So why don't we start with introductions? I'm Lori Timoney. Bruce, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Bruce Rosard, one of the co-founders of Arrival. I've been in this industry for a long time, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation for sure.
And I'm Christian, CEO and founder of Magpie, also been in this industry a long time.
And what I'd like to do is have the guest introduce themselves, but also if you could all please give us a little bit of background on your experience in the travel industry. I think it'll be helpful to our listeners to just get a general understanding of, kind of where you're coming from and possibly just a little bit about some of the roles that you've had. So why don't we start with you, Natalie?
Sure. So hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. So I'm Natalie Hernandez, and I am currently the Vice President of Partnerships for Xplorie. I've spent about 15 years in this industry, graduated from NYU with a master's in travel and tourism. And I've had the pleasure of kind of working both sides of the industry. So I've been on the buyer side. I've worked for large companies such as Expedia. And then I've also been on the supplier side as well. So I've worked for companies such as Gray Line and City Sightseeing, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. So again, I've worn both hats. So I have, I think, a very interesting perspective when it comes to the industry. And, I've had the pleasure, I'd say, for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been in a leadership role, managing teams of various sizes. So
thanks, Natalie. How about you, Dominique?
Hi, I'm Dominique Sidley. I am the Global Trade Strategy Director for Merlin Entertainment. I've been with this company, well, I'm actually in my 29th year in the company. So almost the opposite of Natalie, in that I've spent most of my career focusing within one organization. But in that time, the organization has changed massively. I started working for one of our attractions, and over time moved into a sales role, working very much with a number of trade partners who sell our products, and have the good fortune to work for a company that wants to invest in women, and therefore have progressed considerably to my current position. So I look after a global team. I have teams in 4 continents. So that makes the job, I think, exciting. I'm coming to you today from Australia, where I'm working with my APAC team. So I, have a really varied and lots of variety in my role, but within one company.
Wonderful. Thanks. And Judy?
Hi, I'm Judy Gauthier. I'm the Senior Vice President of Destinations and Partnerships for North America for GoCity. GoCity is the world's largest supplier of attraction passes, multi-attraction passes. I've been in the industry close to 20 years, and I just want to say that the women on this call were okay dating themselves. I noticed that the men on the call weren't okay dating themselves, but yeah, so I've been with GoCity close to 20 years. Before I was with GoCity, I was doing event planning and marketing in Boston. In both of my roles, though, I was with companies that were founded by female leaders, and that's been really inspirational for me. Right now, I oversee a team of 10 regional directors across North America, and they're all female. So I think that gives me an interesting perspective as well, but I'm really excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thanks. So let's just dive in. There's been a lot of research that's been done, Focusrite does studies dealing with gender equality and gender pay gap and so forth. They released, their last study was done in 2021. There's also NAPCO, which is another company that's done some research over the last year. And really there's been really a growth in communities as well, which I think is amazing. And we can talk a little bit more about that towards the end, because I think that's important. But one of the stats that I found really interesting and that stands out to me is that research that's just been done by WeTravel found that 70% of women are the travel decision makers. They're the ones that kind of tell their families like, yep, we're going then, and we're going here, and I got all the, you know, the list of everything we're going to do. And yet when it comes to travel companies and major business decisions being made, only when you look at sort of the table, so to speak, out of every 5 men at the table, there's only 1 woman. So why is that, considering, you know, that travel decision makers are predominantly women? And I want to start with Dominique. Dominique, what are your thoughts on that? Do women have to work harder to get to the table?
I think, I'm not sure whether harder is the right word. I think women need to believe in themselves more to get to the table. I think they need to feel really confident about pushing their requirements from the get-go, straight out of education. I think that's what's hampered women of today. I think women of the future, however, will have more confidence to push themselves to those senior roles and to have a seat at the table. It's really interesting, I think, in the hospitality industry that there's so many more women overall in the industry, but we're not, you know, at those senior levels. There's very clearly a glass ceiling in this industry.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you know, it would be interesting to kind of figure out where is the stopping point? And you know, I have my thoughts on that in terms of how come women are not progressing up that ladder. But I'd love to hear from Judy. What do you think, Judy? What do you see as being kind of, where do women sort of not continue that climb, and what's going on after that?
Yeah, I think I've seen just a change just in the 20 years that I've been working in the travel industry myself. I think very clearly there have already been wide studies done that say that women have to prove themselves more in order to have a seat at the table. But I will say, from my perspective, I feel like, especially right now at this point in time, there's never been a better time to be a female in the industry, because there's just so much societal attention being paid on diversity and inclusion, the diversity of voices, having more equity. So I just think I get really excited about what that will be 5-10 years from now, because I feel like today is when all of this attention is being paid. So I just think it's just taking more time.
Yeah, Natalie, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with both Dominique and Judy. So Dominique said something that just really hit home for me, which is that I think that women sometimes we shrink ourselves, right? We don't always ask for what we want and what we know that we deserve. And I think historically men are much better at that. So I think we're getting there, and there's so many different, to Judy's point, there's so many different resources now. There's, you know, women leading in travel and hospitality, right? There's, you know, you go on LinkedIn and there's all these different, you know, associations that you can join that give you the tools that you need to, again, speak your truth. I also think that, yes, there's a lot of women in the hospitality industry historically. I don't know what the ratio is, you know, to men and women, but I do think there's more women, but in lower level positions. I think what also happens is that, you know, women take some time off, right, to raise their children. And then they might decide to, you know, take some time off and come back, right, years later. And I think that as a result, sometimes they're not able to, you know, go up the corporate ladder as quickly because there's a gap there, right? So I also think that that sometimes impacts the speed in which they're able to get to a leadership position.
Yeah, that's interesting. Dominique, what I think, one thing I just want to call attention to here is that, Dominique, can you talk just a minute? I know you have something you wanted to say, but I do want you to mention the project, the thesis that you just, I think you finished it, right? Can you maybe talk just a second about that too? Because I think that's important.
Yeah, I've just completed my MBA in leadership and sustainability, but I focus very much from the sustainability perspective on the United Nations Sustainable Goal number 5, which is all about women and girls and gender balance and gender equity. And in that thesis, I particularly focused my dissertation on the impact of COVID-19 on the gender pay gap. And what we're seeing, has been evidenced, is that during COVID-19, women, not just in the hospitality industry, but given the scale of women in hospitality, were so impacted by the fact that so many more of them took time away from their work for caring duties when they had children at home, not at school. Maybe they had elderly parents who they were very concerned about because the impact on the elderly at that time. So the impact of COVID-19 has further exacerbated and stretched that gender pay gap because women came out of the working model, and then and very much so in those more senior roles actually than some of the lower roles. And further to that, I think in terms of the whole spectrum of positions in hospitality, we lost a lot of roles, and therefore they were a lot of women because, again, proportionately there are so many more women. So it's been quite an interesting study, I have to say. I mean, it's been a labor of love at 52 doing your MBA, but it definitely it's been really interesting to see how that has been impacted. I think the positive is that the focus on closing the gender pay gap has not changed as a result of it. And, I think more organisations are focused on that. To Judy's point, more organisations are really lent into inclusivity and, pushing more females into senior roles, trying to break that glass ceiling.
Yeah. Bruce, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have a few, and I'm just going to kind of rocket fire them out there. A few things. One, you talk about the glass ceiling, and I'm just really curious, like, where is that glass ceiling? Where are you coming across that? I mean, you're all senior executives. You got an MBA, you got the master's from NYU, you got tons of experience, Judy. Where are you, like, literally hitting the glass ceiling? So that's one question. I'm going to just throw out a few. Number two, as you mentioned, Natalie, I mean, there is the caring for family element, and women do that more than men. And that obviously has a huge impact on this whole story. So, how do we get beyond that so that you can come back and be gone the glass ceiling? And then number three is the equity in pay. That's one that I just never understood from my own experience of running a couple companies and working at a really progressive company in the middle. I mean, there just was no such thing. So I'm just curious, like, curiosity, where are you seeing that? I mean, how can that even be justified in a company? I realize that, I'm coming out of nowhere on that, but there was a LinkedIn poll not that long ago that someone put out there about the challenges for women in, whether it was corporate America or whether it was in travel, and what is the biggest challenge? And one of the questions wasn't even difference in pay. And, the guy who put the poll out got blasted, or I think it was a guy that put the poll out. Like, of course that's number one. And every woman who replied says, of course that's number one. So a couple questions there. Would love to hear some feedback on, because these are all questions that I think about, but I don't have any of the answers.
Yeah, and before, I just want to respond to that, Bruce. What you see here is not typical. Right here, you have a lot of women that are in leadership roles, but overall, that is not typical. That is not the case that you have, it's not an easy climb, and it is without question followed up by, statistics. And as I said, one of the most predominant studies has been the 2021 Focusrite study, that it's not the case that there is no glass ceiling. It's there. And so I just, and there's a lot of positivity here, which is great, because there are ways of breaking the glass ceiling and getting to the top or getting close to the top. But I just want to say that I do think it's important we recognize that the bulk of women are facing the challenges that we're talking about, and that this is not a typical group, let's just say. But anyway, somebody else want to respond to some of Bruce's questions?
Yeah, Lori, I mean, I'll tackle that first one and I'll just tag on to you. I mean, the research is done. The research is out there. So the research says that there aren't as many women in senior leadership positions. So we can take that as a fact because the research has been done. But I will say it's getting easier. And just from my own experience, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I mean, the company that I work for now, it's dominantly female. When I take a look at who our chairman of the board is, it's female chairman of the board. We have a female chief commercial officer. So I would say, and this is the case for any underrepresented group, by the way, it's not just females. You should be looking for companies that value diversity, the ones who are empowering different thoughts, different voices, not just female, but anything, any underrepresented voice. So, and I think today it's a lot easier to do that than perhaps it was even 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, and that's, so when people ask, sort of what is one of the ways that we overcome this? Well, there are a lot of them, but one of the points of view is to look for a company that is inclusive and it cares about this stuff. I mean, Dominique, you talked about Merlin being. Can you maybe give us some examples of how you think Merlin is supportive? Like, why would you say that about Merlin?
I mean, we, strategically speaking, we've kind of made a commitment to both equity and equality around genders, all genders. And we've made a commitment to increase the number of female leaders. To Bruce's point about where's the glass ceiling happen? Across a number of hospitality organisations, women are progressing into kind of middle to senior management. It's beyond that onto boards where there is much more of a gap between genders. And to Judy's point, it isn't just women who are not making it onto those boards. There is definitely disparity between men and all other genders. But for Merlin, it's, we've made a commitment to this. We measure and monitor, we're mandated as a UK organisation over 250 employees that we have to report on our gender pay gap. And I think, putting that on the table every year, stating where you are at, brings a natural focus to it. I mean, one of the challenges of COVID, I guess, was that companies were given a hiatus from reporting on their gender pay gaps, and I think that will come into play again this year. But having that little bit of time where they didn't have to really report, doesn't make me question, did we slip back a little bit? I mean, in hospitality, the gender pay gap is around 7%.
Yeah. Okay.
From around about November the 20th, women stop earning against their male companions.
Interesting. So, Christian, I have a question for you. Why do you think that it's important that women have a seat at the table? What do you think that women bring to or can bring to senior leadership roles in a travel organization?
I mean, I think it's clear that women are half the population and women are our customers, but it's also a diversity thing, right? It's traditionally just this middle-aged white men looking at myself and Bruce here. We don't have that diversity. We don't understand different perspectives, and we don't understand all the customers. And I don't want to say it's obvious, but it does seem obvious, doesn't it? You do want all those different perspectives. So, you know, if you started all this again, I don't know why you would start any other way. Obviously, we've got to this place, and it used to be far more inequitable, and it's getting better, which is great, but we've still got some way to go. And I think it's difficult. It seems like it's difficult to get out of that habit that we were in whenever the worst of it was in the 50s and the 60s. It takes a long time. People have to grow out of that generation, it looks like. And I think I always assume, I don't know this, I've never been worked for a big corporation. I've always worked for myself, but I always assumed in these big corporations, it is somewhat a matter of time. These senior positions are a bunch of mid to elderly men, and they have to grow out of that. And that takes a while for people to get old enough to retire or whatever else. But and
Finally making some progress in Congress on that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I want to chime in. I have like two different perspectives here. So like Christian, I've only worked either for myself or very small companies. Judy, your company is fairly large, and Dominique, yours is pretty darn large. Natalie, yours is on the smallish side, right? So in our space, the experiences space, there are so many women entrepreneurs. Like a lot of the, tour operators, the people who run the tours and activities. I don't know what the percentages are, but there's a good, healthy percentage where it's the women who own the company, and that changes the whole dialogue, right? And I don't know what comments you might have about that, about the actual ownership side of smaller companies, but how does that translate then into bigger companies? Like, where is that roadblock? So Natalie, you're a VP of a smallish, very successful company with great credentials and track record. I mean, what's next? I mean, do you knock on someone's door and say, "I'm ready for your C-suite"? You have to apply for the job in a C-suite. Like, how do you get there? And one more thing, since I'm guessing 2 or 3 questions at a time, Dominique, you mentioned the board, right? And that's the part of like top down. So get women, get diversity on the board, and then the rest will follow. And is that totally based on the company's mission and how they run their company, or can that be done more organically? So there's my the things that I was thinking about listening to.
Maybe Natalie first, and then we can have Dominique comment.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. So, I do work for, a smaller company, but I've worked for the largest travel company in the world, Expedia, right? And I will say that, unlike, let's say, Merlin and Expedia, where publicly, right, and not to say that they don't want to do it, or they're only doing it because they have to share their numbers publicly. There was a huge initiative to get more women in leadership positions at Xplorie as well, similar to Merlin. Well, excuse me, not Xplorie, Expedia rather. But with Xplorie, right, we're a privately owned company. We're not having to necessarily disclose that information to the public. So with that being said, I will say that, if you want to impact change, like, you have to be the one, like, be the person who's impacting that change, right? So meaning, if you're working for a smaller company that maybe isn't at the time putting as much focus on, inclusion and diversity, it may not be because they don't want to. It could be they just haven't had the resources or someone, to come and say, hey, this is important and this is why this is important, right? And I feel like at Xplorie, I'm starting to do that, right? And I'm the one who's kind of leading the charge, or one of the people that are leading the charge to impact change. Because to Christian's point earlier, there's years and years of conditioning, right? And it takes a long time for those people to unlearn what they've known to be true for many, many years, right? But you got to be the voice that impacts the change. And whether that's like, I'm a part of Latina professionals, I'm, a member of Women Leading in Travel and Hospitality, I'm bringing that awareness internally, right? So that was a point that I had. And then the second point I wanted to make was, so going back to Bruce's question, and you had mentioned, how do you get to the C-suite at this point? Was that your question, Bruce?
You're on mute.
Yes, that was when I talked to you about the fact, where you are in your career now, and it may or may not be at Xplorie because it's not that large company. I think you're one level from the CEO, right? So how do you get to a bigger company and get into that C-suite?
I think you just have to keep proving yourself, right? I mean, I think it's about, making sure that you are, for me personally, it's about continuing to challenge myself, right? In the role that I'm in today, continue to impact change, right? Continue to, help increase visibility and revenue and really have a seat at the table. And I think if you're able to do that, and again, really impact change and growth, where you currently are, then you can make your way to that next level at, a larger company or even within the company that you're in, right? So it's all about continuing to challenge yourself and continuing to challenge the status quo.
I'm going to ask, pardon me if this is an ignorant question, and you can call me on it. How's that different than a male counterpart in your?
So I'm going to say, how does anybody get a job in a C-suite? You get a job in a C-suite.
That's what when Natalie was saying that, I'm like, well, how is it different?
Same thing though. I think she's saying the exact same thing. She's taken many jobs. She's shared it herself. She's gotten a wealth of experience. She's moved up. She's now in a VP level. She'll prove herself here. She'll increase the commercials of the business. She'll make it profitable, and she'll move on to the next business where she'll get a senior vice president position or be C-suite. That's how it works. And we're lucky enough, like I said earlier, that we're in a period of time that there are more women helping women rise the ranks, whether or not they had a hard time themselves. Whether or not I had a hard time, I'm still going to help other represented groups move up in the ranks myself.
Yeah. And I want to hear from Dominique on this, but I think that, it's all about awareness and we're talking about this because there is an obvious issue. We talked about it. We talked about the research. We talked about the numbers. There is an obvious issue. And yes, there are ways of overcoming it. Maybe you're at the wrong company if you can't overcome it, and you're trying and it's just not working. But I do think that it starts with awareness, discussion, and some real working points in terms of trying to understand how to move up the ladder. Dominique, I know you were going to comment on this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, especially as somebody that spent some time really digging into this.
All of what Natalie and Judy and yourself have pointed out there is absolutely correct, and I totally concur. And I often speak to people about diversity and inclusion. I also have a role in Merlin as an inclusion change director, and I talk a lot about this. And in my organisation and others, they say lots of people feedback, but it's just right. Gender balance is just right. Equity for all genders it's the right thing to do. So why aren't people doing it if it's so right? And I absolutely agree that there is significant change now. I think we need both women and female and male advocates. We need males fighting for females as much as women, holding the elevator for the next generation. It has to come across through everybody, not just kind of militant women saying we need a place at the table. Very recently, Merlin has changed its CEO. Our previous CEO, Nick Varney, retired after kind of 30 years as the founder, and quite an amazing and dynamic CEO. So we had an opportunity then to really change the stakes. And I'm not saying that our current CEO isn't the right person for the job, because I'm also a huge believer in meritocracy. But we didn't change the dynamic and have a female CEO. I wasn't party to that choosing, but nonetheless, it didn't happen, even though we're really working hard for this. And there were females who applied. So I do still feel that if you are a white middle class male, you also have a voice and you have a seat at the table, and you should feel that your career can progress, because it should be about equity for all. The challenges that we've got is we're still very much swimming against a tide of significant male voices. So it's so difficult. It's such a difficult thing to say, this is how we're going to get to 50-50.
Yeah.
In our company below C-suite, we are 50-50. It's after that we're not. We have one female on our board.
So let's define some of the steps involved in making a difference, okay? Because I think it's important to kind of have some takeaways that are helpful, right? We talked about awareness. Some of the other things that come to mind might be things like your hiring practices. You just talked about the fact that Merlin, who is a very progressive company, clearly they are, because you have an actual position within the company that deals with diversity and inclusion, had an opportunity to choose a female CEO. And was there a female CEO that was a viable candidate? I don't know, but something to think about. So looking at hiring practices and maybe refocusing, obviously fixing a pay gap, right? If there is a pay gap in your organization, and you need to, number one, understand if there is and face it, and then do something about it. I'd love to hear what some of your thoughts, Judy, what are your thoughts on some of the other things that we can do to kind of, move the needle?
I think a lot of this can come from the HR departments. A lot of it is driven by HR. So it's not just hiring practices. It's making sure that the company itself is committed to diversity and inclusion. You'll see that represented, by the way, on a company's website in their own hiring process, but then also in their own marketing efforts. Are they diverse in their own marketing? And then I think, especially in Go City, we have a lot of committees that are focused on, this very topic. So I feel like you want to join a company that puts their money where their mouth is, sort of like Merlin. Merlin says they're behind diversity and inclusion, and they clearly are. You can see it throughout their website. You can see it throughout their own HR. So I think you have to push your HR department to, focus on it, and then seek out companies that actually stand behind it.
Okay.
Laurie, can I give you some feedback on that?
Yes, absolutely.
I just want to, again, coming from a small company, I've always been at small companies. Being the white man, I always feel as if, one, men are scared to speak out because we're terrified to say the wrong thing at the wrong time in front of people, and it's really easy, right? So men aren't going to speak out on public forums on LinkedIn and places, because there are definitely people ready just to rip us down. That's not a men thing. That's just a human thing, right? There's always someone ready. So we don't speak out enough. It's difficult to know when and the right tone. And then I think another thing is on just a person-to-person level, and that's what I've seen, right? So I don't know, I'm learning about this more recently. I don't know if my whole career I've been I haven't had my eyes open to the inequities. I've just always assumed I'm doing the right thing. But I might have gone through meetings with my staff and had some bias. I don't think I have, but I might have done. But I need then women just to come to me and say, hey, Christian, when the man spoke, you did this, and when the woman spoke, you did this. I may not know I'm doing that, but I'm very open to people giving me feedback. I don't need letters from lawyers to tell me that. I don't need threats of this and that. I just want someone to walk up to me and say, you did this and you did that, and that wasn't, change that next time. And then just last point, and Natalie brought this up, there's the cliche of a man and a woman goes into an interview and there's a list of requirements, and the man looks through and says, yep, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that. And the woman's more likely to say, oh, I'm not sure if I could do that or not. Let me think. And that's a confidence thing, right? And I look at the 4 women here, and I know you all fairly well. I know you come across very confident. I don't know if that's your business front, because I know you all from a business perspective, but I think a lot of women are not as confident naturally, and you have to act that somewhat in a meeting. And I think men just look out and think, oh, you women can handle yourselves. There's no need to pay attention to these nuances. And all that is just men not thinking through it. It's not that we mean badly. We don't, we want to do the right thing, but we don't know how to do the right thing.
I think
I
that
think that's a generalization. Like in my head, I'm married to a very, very strong woman. She's also the third partner of Arrival that no one really knows about. She's way smarter than I am, and she will be in a meeting, or she'll deal with someone and get one response, and then I'll deal with that same person and get a totally different response. And she insists it's because she's a woman, and that's why she got a different response. And I'm like, holy shit, like, why would that be? But it is, like, she's shown me different circumstances of that. So, not every guy is the same, Christian, where, some of us can really look at it and relate and understand there's still this gap there of the way people, men are treating women in the work world.
I'm not saying all guys are open. I'm just saying a lot more guys are open that would be if people approached us. And
Yeah. I would agree with Christian. I think that, and again, I don't want this isn't a general, blanket statement, but I do think that when the topic does come up, and there is a little hostility out there, right? There is some hostility around this subject. And, I think that, just speaking for myself, I think I need to do a better job in creating just a more open environment, so that if there are folks like Christian and Bruce and many, many other men out there that will admit, like, hey, you know what, there's a lot for us to learn about this particular subject, and I don't always know that I'm coming correct, but help me, right? Help me to understand, like, I want to do better and be better. And I think part of that is, again, it's our responsibility to kind of have, welcome that and create a less hostile environment, so that we can really, to Dominique's point earlier, right? Like, we all kind of want to be on the same page, right? We don't want to be enemies, men, against women. It behooves us to all, support one another, right? So I definitely think, again, that I've picked up on some hostility around this subject matter.
The way I interpreted what Christian said is really that women have to support themselves, and they have to speak up. And I think that sometimes lots of times men don't think about, they might see that there's, a conversation going on around the table, and maybe the woman that is at the table isn't getting the opportunity to speak, and they're not going to go, hey, by the way, you got to let Jody speak up because she hasn't said anything in a while. But they need to be thinking about that when they're sitting around a table with a woman, and is there a an opportunity to bring her in. But so we are running low on time, but I do want to pose one last question to each of you. So if there was a woman, in your organization or outside your organization that is really hoping to achieve some type of a leadership role, what would be your piece of advice? Obviously there's a lot of advice you can offer, but choose one piece of advice that you would offer to that woman in terms of, how do you achieve a position of leadership? So Dominique, can you start us off with that?
The advice I would give, Judy's actually articulated this really well. Choose the right business. Choose somewhere that wants women in senior roles, that is balanced in terms of what it gives, what it provides for all genders, and organizations that want to grow and develop, not just their employees, but themselves as a business. And my kind of final, or my point on this is, we have to continue to educate ourselves in this subject matter, to say, and Christian made a really good point on this, that, there's quite a lot of fear around this. What if I get it wrong? What if I use the wrong pronoun? What if? And it's because people don't know if they're going to get themselves into trouble without intent. And I think and so the crux of that is education. So being a company that wants to keep growing and educating all its employees, because to say, I don't know and I'm not sure, to me is weaponized ignorance. You have to really
Yeah,
That's
good point. So choose the right company, choose the right business. Judy?
I mean, she just echoed exactly what I was saying. It's finding a company either by looking at their website, looking at their hiring practices that is valuing the diversity of voices. I think those are the companies that are going to succeed, and those are the companies that you're not going to have to trailblaze a path for yourself. You'll be able to grow. Look for other women within the organization who are willing to mentor you or help you, or maybe not even other women, just other people, men who you can get valuable insight or valuable information from that can just help grow your career. And the last thing I'll say, just to go back on what Christian said, what I took that you were saying, Christian, is that, you want to make sure you don't get it wrong. And I think we all just have to just look at it and just assume good intent. Assume that there's good intent for everybody at the table and just communicate so that and foster a community where communication is valued and communication is welcome.
And Natalie?
Sorry, that will not be included in the recording, my puppy. This is very simple, but ask. Right? Assuming you're working for an organization that supports equality, that supports, women's growth, ask them, what do I need to do to make sure that I continue to, to grow within this organization, and what do I need to do to get to a leadership role, right? And I think, again, historically, women don't always ask for what they want. They shrink themselves. And I think if you ask, you should be able to get the clarity that you need to be able to, continue to progress, into that leadership position.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I know Judy, I think she had one last thing she wanted to pop in here.
You just made me think of something, Natalie. You're 100% right. Everything that I've gotten in my career, when I look back on it, I've gotten because I've just asked for it. Just have confidence in yourself. Really believe that, know your value, understand the value that you're bringing to a company. And that takes a lot of self-inspection, right? To understand your value. But I've been the only woman at a table countless times, but never once have I doubted that I belonged at that table. So understand your value, have that confidence, and you'll go places.
I have a feeling we could go on for a long time on this particular topic. I mean, I feel like there was so much that I was thinking about, including, work-life balance and all that, but that might have to be for another time because we're out of time. But I just want to thank everybody for your participation. I mean, this has been such a great conversation, and thanks for dialing in from Sydney. Dom, hopefully the weather gets better. And thanks to Christian and Bruce for some really good insight and feedback. So have a great day, and that's it for now.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.